Thanks for coming. This is going to be a great day, and it's really great to see a lot of people from, especially from Hunter's past, but we have a lot of shared past. So it's today, our symposium is going to discuss really a singular contribution to the rehabilitation of individuals with spinal cord injury. And that's why we called this 5 Decades of Restoring Upper Extremity Movement with Neuroprostheses. I'm Bob Kirsch. I'm the chair of biomedical engineering at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm the executive director of the Functional Electrical Stimulation Center, the second one. The first one's sitting right there, Hunter Peckham. I think we have a really great agenda today, and it covers both the history of upper extremity neuroprosthesis development and a number of contemporary issues where ongoing work is needed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I hope it goes without saying that one of the major goals today is to recognize the significant and ongoing impact and influence that Hunter Peckham has had on this work and on all of us in making all this happen. Yep. His creativity, his leadership, and his perseverance will be obvious throughout the day. Hunter, you've had a tremendous influence on me personally, both professionally and in my personal life, as a teacher, a mentor, a colleague, a leader, and really a role model. Like I said, I have the advantage of being the second director of the FES Center that was started and led for many years by Hunter. I also learned a lot from you when you were the interim chair of biomedical engineering, and it rubbed off a little bit, I hope. So I thank my lucky stars that our paths crossed the way they did, Hunter, really. I know this is true for many of you. So raise your hand if Hunter hired you, mentored you, or collaborated with you. That's really a tremendous thing, and it's, you know, kind of hard to believe that we're all from different walks of life and we collaborate. You know, there's a reason that we do that, and so I want to thank you, Hunter, for all of that. That's fantastic. So, what are we going to try to do today? So, our overall objectives are to review the successes and the limitations of the Cleveland program that provided interventions for restoring upper extremity function in people with cervical spinal cord injuries. You're using neuroprostheses and adjunctive surgical procedures. We have a few specific goals. We're going to talk first a little bit about historical context. So this is like how it was done, how this all came together, how a truly transdisciplinary team of collaborators, including the research participants, was formed, and it led to the ability eventually to restore hand and arm function in hundreds of people with cervical spinal cord injury. But nevertheless, there are a number of issues that are not adequately resolved. So we're going to talk about some current limitations and possible resolutions, especially focusing on 2 issues that are less often discussed in our research world. One is, how do we provide long-term support for research participants who are benefiting from their implanted neuroprostheses beyond the time that the grants fund that research? And secondly, we're going to talk about how to achieve sustainable commercialization for smaller populations like cervical spinal cord injury. So that's what we're trying to accomplish today. I have a number of housekeeping issues. So as you probably heard 20 times already, there's no food or drink in this hall, Silver Hall it's called. So please respect that. If you have questions about any of the logistics, you can go to the registration desk that's just outside here and ask somebody, a staff member sitting there. At lunchtime, I'll give you a preview. We're going to have boxed lunches. Grab a lunch and go down the hall a little bit. We'll direct you there. We're going to have a fireside chat, so don't dawdle. We're going to try to get that started pretty quickly. And if you're not participating in the fireside chat, there's over here where we had some of our, where we had the continental breakfast, Coke Hall, there's going to be additional lunches and tables there. It's a live stream event, so welcome everyone online. So if you're in the audience here and you have a question or comment, wait for a microphone because they won't hear you. And it's disconcerting when they hear the answer but not the question, okay? If you're online and you want to ask a question or make a comment, there's a chat feature. So put your question into there and we will try our absolute best to get to them, time permitting. Finally, restrooms. There are restrooms right outside here. They're very convenient. There's some in the back as well. I think the last thing that I want to bring up is I want to thank the organizers. So you're going to see many of them today. They're going to be leading the sessions and moderating them, sort of the research organizers. But I, in particular, want to thank Cheryl Dudek, Deidre Rexleiter, Lisa McKenna, and Sophia Sina for the real logistic organization. Things are going very smoothly. It's very nice. Okay, I think that's it. My next, I have the pleasure of introducing our Master of Ceremonies. It's Dr. Joseph Pancrazio. Joe was a fantastic program officer at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke at NIH. He was my program officer for quite a while. He then became the chair of biomedical engineering at George Mason University. And then he moved. I think you were the chair at UT Dallas, no? Well, he's now the vice president for research at University of Texas, Dallas. And is a longtime colleague of many of us and a friend. And he's going to be our Master of Ceremony. So, Joe.
Well, good morning. What a fantastic environment. It's great to see everybody here. I've been handed a late-breaking news that we are experiencing technical difficulties with the live stream. Operators are working on it. Please, your call is important. Just stand by. We've got to take care of it. I'll tell you that this is a meeting by engineers, created by engineers, operated by engineers, so we will be on time to our best bet, and I'm going to work to be able to get us on schedule. And you're going to hear me say this a couple times. It is really my privilege to be able to be here today, but also to serve as your MC. And I can't say MC without saying MC Hammer. I try so hard. I want to extend my appreciation also to our organizers and Cheryl and Lisa and others that really helped make this happen. And really delighted that for those of you who are joining online, although technical difficulties, and those who live here in the area, those who have made the trek with a pilgrimage to Cleveland to join us. I think there are a lot of old friends that get a chance to be able to get together. That's kind of a mark of somebody who brings people together and does so that there's a lot of hugs going on here, which tells you a lot about the person who is the magnet for us. And we're in an absolutely inspiring and beautiful place. Hallelujah. You're here, and maybe there's going to be a little bit of preaching in the choir, but I think, as Bob said, they're going to talk about some real issues. And today is a celebration and reflection opportunity with a historical lens on achievement in neuroprosthetics. And it's often said that we must understand history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. As your MC, Hammer, I'm taking the liberty, though, of giving you a little bit of a different charge today. And for you as attendees, participants, as well as our speakers, I'd like you to consider what all had to go right for the things, to see the things that that have been collectively achieved. How did these stars align to realize the story of progress that we're discussing today? So with that, I'm pleased to welcome Bob as he walks up onto the stage, and essentially to introduce and kick off our first panel discussion. And it'll be on the history of upper extremity neuroprosthesis development. And as Bob walks up, I will say from my script that it is my pleasure to introduce Robert F. Kirsch, PhD, the Alan H. and Constance T. Ford Professor and Chair of Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve University, and the Executive Director of the Cleveland FES Center, as he mentioned. He's a research career scientist and biomedical engineer with the Louis Stokes Cleveland VA Medical Center, and bioscientific staff with the Department of Orthopedics at Metro Health System. His research focuses on the restoration of arm movements for individuals with complete paralysis of arm muscles due to spinal cord injury or other neurological disorders using functional electrical stimulation, as well as high-performance user command interfaces such as brain-computer interfaces and advanced prosthetic user interfaces. So let's give it up for Bob as he joins us back on stage to moderate the panel.
Yeah, I'm back already. It's the last time today, though, I promise. So I'm moderating this session. As Joe said, it's called the History of Upper Extremity Neuroprosthesis Development. So I'm just going to give some context, and then we'll let the actual speakers speak. So this first session is going to talk about the processes and the people that kicked off the idea of upper extremity neuroprostheses. Okay, there were certainly earlier contributions, but this session is going to focus on the innovations that were specifically necessary to make the implementation of an upper extremity neuroprosthesis possible. So it's going to go from a transition from limited fundamental knowledge and no technology through studies that were done with percutaneous electrodes, including a multi-center clinical trial of an upper extremity neuroprosthesis in people with cervical spinal cord injury. So as you're going to hear a bunch today, Hunter was really the primary catalyst in this transition. There were a lot of people involved, but Hunter was really the catalyst. So this research, as I said, was pioneered by many people whose contributions will be recognized today, and a number of them will be speakers. So I suspect that there'll be a little more, there'll be more than a little sort of reminiscing by those who have gone through this and have been directly involved in the development of these neuroprostheses. But I really hope that you can use, if you're newer to this area, you can use it to inform and motivate the next generation of scientists and engineers and clinicians who are really inheriting this endeavor, and that you can use this history to serve as an excellent model for your own career and your own activities. Okay? So we have 3 speakers, and I'll introduce them just before they come up. So the first is Tom Mortimer, PhD, who's an emeritus professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve University School of Engineering and School of Medicine. Tom and Hunter have known each other for a long time, really since their PhD student days. And they've obviously known each other and interacted since then. Tom established the Applied Neural Control Laboratory, which is the predecessor of what we now call the Neural Engineering Center. He was also the original principal investigator of a contract from the NIH Neuroprosthesis program. And that ran for many years. Tom was a principal investigator. Pat Crago then took over, and then finally I did. And so it ran for many years. And it really has enabled the entire neural engineering program that we have at Case Western Reserve University today. His contribution, I'm just going to go quickly, there are many. For this neuroprosthesis work, he studied several critical fundamental issues, such as corrosion of electrodes during stimulation, fatigue of stimulated muscle in animals and then in human subjects, and he's been instrumental in electrode design and electrode materials. So Tom, can you come forward here? And I might ask Jeff and Mike to come up and just sit here as well, so we have an ease of transition. So this is going to be largely oral presentation by these guys, and I urge you to listen.
Don't go to sleep?
Yeah. There you go.
When I was 11, my friend Joe, a year older, told me about a summer job he had landed at Palo Duro Canyon State Park. I told Joe, "You ain't going without me." Sure enough, he got me hired too. That job turned out to be far more than a summer gig. It shaped my life in ways I'm still discovering. I owe Joe for that. And perhaps it is fate that 4 years later, Joe's life took a profound turn when a car accident left him with a C6, C7 spinal cord injury. The bond we shared and the responsibility it inspired drove much of my career. And it brings me here today to honor someone who shares that commitment to restoring function to people with spinal cord injury. Hunter Peckham. Eventually, I found my way to Case Institute of Technology, drawn by a serendipitous mention of its graduate program in biomedical engineering. I joined the lab of Professor James Reswick, where groundbreaking work was underway to develop a pneumatically powered exoskeletal structure for restoration of hand and arm function for the C4 level spinal cord injured patient. At the same time, a postdoc named Lojza Vodovnik arrived in Reswick's lab with a bold vision to use electrically activated muscles instead of mechanical mechanisms to power movement. Early attempts to implement Vodovnik's idea faced a major challenge. Atrophied muscles fatigue far too quickly for practical use. When I left Case for a postdoctoral fellowship in Sweden, I stumbled upon critical insights in muscle physiology. These insights suggested that electrically induced exercise could rebuild strength and endurance in atrophied muscles, solving a problem that had stymied earlier efforts to realize Vodovnik's neural bypass. Returning to Case in 1969 as an assistant professor, I faced immediate challenges and opportunities. Reswick would be leaving Case in 4 months, handed me the remaining months of his grant, 3 graduate students, and a tight deadline for the next round of funding. Together, we pulled it off. That effort laid the groundwork for an exciting collaboration with Hunter Peckham, whose doctoral work demonstrated the feasibility of electrically induced exercise to physiologically and histochemically transform muscle fibers. Hunter's passion took us further. He was eager to bring this work into human trials, building on Vodovnik's original dream of a neural bypass. But in 1972, funding was needed to support the now Dr. Peckham. A chance meeting with Carl Frank at NIH turned the tide. Securing bridge funding that allowed us to continue, this marked the beginning of a very productive relationship with the NIH Neuroprostheses program, which would sustain the Applied Neural Control Lab for years to come. Hunter's leadership and vision became central to the lab's success. In 1977, we secured funding for a rehabilitation engineering center, with Hunter taking a leading role. His work and my sabbatical year in Germany marked a pivotal moment. Hunter and Dr. Charles Herndon forged a productive relationship that shaped the center's direction. While this transition marked a shift in roles for me, it also highlighted Hunter's ability to lead and innovate in ways that have defined his remarkable career. Today, as I reflect on the serendipity and relationships that have guided my path, it is clear that this work has always been about people. Like Joe, whose accident first opened my eyes to the need. Like Reswick, Vodovnik, and the teams that have laid the groundwork, and like Hunter, whose vision and dedication have transformed lives, it is an honor to celebrate him today.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Fantastic. So our next speaker is Jeff Thrope. He's the former president, CEO, and managing director of NDI Medical, a venture capital and commercialization firm located in Beechwood, Ohio, that has focused exclusively on innovative neurodevice technologies. For today, Jeff's role is to talk about, he was the first engineer in Hunter's lab. It was a few years ago. And they really put together the idea of an upper extremity. They implemented it, made it a reality. And they've had several subsequent adventures together as well, which we may hear about later. He has worked with Hunter for 45 years and considers him to be his closest friend. So, Jeff.
Hi. Hunter, I'm not going to follow the rules that you set out because it's too late for you to do anything about it. You invited me up here. It's your fault. Sit there and take it. This is true. I'm going to be consistent. An audience, I don't speak publicly, so I wrote this all out. You'll have to give me some slack. Bob, I want to thank you because although I've been retired for the past few years, I feel relatively young being sandwiched between these two guys here. It feels good. Nice gift, Bob. Thank you. In May 1979, I was graduating with a degree in biomedical engineering from Case Institute of Technology, my diploma literally being handed off to me on stage by my advisor, Tom Mortimer. In fact, Tom, you might not remember this, but as I got up on stage, you gave me a letter on behalf of you and the faculty thanking me for helping set up the Undergraduate Biomedical Engineering Society. It was thoughtful, and thank you. Anyway, I go home to my house on East 115th Street where I'm sharing a bunch of, a room with a bunch of people, and I get a phone call. Now, it was on a landline. I mean, who even heard of a term landline? The phone was in the hallway, okay? There wasn't even answering machines at that time. And it's Hunter. And he says, "You want to come on board?" And I screamed, "Hunter!" I was so excited. So you never know when you get a phone call that's going to shape your entire adult life. You see, because quickly he became and is until this day my best friend. Hunter has that effect on people, and it makes you feel like you can do anything. Example, within weeks of meeting him, I was babysitting his 6- and 7-year-old kids, Greg and Indy. And then he had his wife cooking for me almost every night. So the guy has influence, and that's something that I'm sure you've all figured out, but I digress. Anyway, Hunter tells me to meet him in a few weeks at Metro General Hospital at 8:30 a.m. And of course, I get there on time. I'm all excited. I found a little clip-on tie. I put it on. I'm all ready to my first day. And of course, he's late. He was always late. It turns out there was reasons, because he makes time for everybody. He's present for you, and he's sincere in his interactions. He always is respectful for people, whether it was his family members or whether it's faculty members. He had time for you, making you feel like you were the only person that matters, which made him perpetually late for most of his appointments, but he had good reason. Hunter was cultivating relationships that would be the foundation for all that we did and all that has been done in the field of neuroprosthetics. He taught classes, advised students, published papers, wrote and was awarded grants, and he led a group of team members that wanted to be part of a journey that he was carving out. Okay, so back to my first day. I'm wandering the halls, and eventually, this is at Metro General Highland View Hospital, and I meet Jim Jadich and his father, Walter, although we never called him Walter, he was Mr. Jadich. And Jim was just completing his rehab after sustaining a C5, C6 complete spinal injury from a diving accident. Jim was one of several patients that Hunter had recruited and implanted with percutaneous electrodes. Hunter had worked with a young electrical engineer, Bob Struther, and they developed an analog-based 4-channel stimulator that had multiple types of input controls. I mean, crazy. They even were putting EMG electrodes in the back of your ear, and if you can wiggle your ear, you can control your hand. Okay, so there were a lot of different things going on. We tried a lot of different things at that time. I think we even had electrodes in your neck. If you can control your neck, you can actually control your hand. At this point, my wife, Jan, wants me to tell you that there were no iPhones, there were no personal computers, there were no internet at that time. And it was like, how did you do all this stuff? And yeah, Jen, it was a very, very, very long time ago. I know, some of us old and a lot of us are ancient at this point. Anyway, my responsibility as a biomedical engineer was to service these patients that already were implanted, recruit new patients that were necessary for the research program, and to set up the research experiments that Hunter had devised and record data on some of the things that Tom had alluded to: muscular fatigue, exercise in reversing disuse atrophy, while working to demonstrate that the grasping patterns can actually be maintained and be stable over time, provide functional benefits to the users. I was an integral part of the rehabilitation on that spinal cord injury unit. Hunter felt it was critical that we participate fully and use our engineering skills to help in every way possible to better the lives of the patients. So we went to their homes, we made adaptations to their environment, and along the way became a rehabilitation team member, along with the occupational therapists, physical therapists, nurses, social workers, and doctors. I played a role of a rehabilitation engineer along with everything else we were doing in the research program. So what was our team like that Hunter made? I'll correct one thing that Bob said. At least the first engineer that was hired on the team was Jim Bucket. And Jim was hired prior to me, and he developed the next generation of advanced portable stimulators and controllers that moved us from analog to microprocessor-based systems. Brian Smith came on shortly after I did, and he worked on the, quote, other side of town at Case, and he led the team that developed the first 8-channel implantable-based system. And Mike Keith came aboard just afterwards, being the first hand surgeon that Hunter recruited to work with us, completing the original team. So over the course of these next several years of the 1980s, Mike Keith, Hunter, and I worked closely to implant over a dozen percutaneous C5, C6 systems. And Mike, with his X-ray eyes, he knew precisely where to target these various muscles, generating these lateral and palmar grasping patterns. Now, Hunter and Pat Craig and I developed the first multi-channel laboratory-based computer system to coordinate these muscles to refine the various hand grasps, setting the stage for what has been the basis of coordinated movement in both upper and lower extremity patterns. I think we called the system the MinStim, and it was the first programming system for neuroprosthetics. And over time, we had many, many patients utilizing percutaneous systems. And Hunter's students, several of them here today, were recruited to support the patients. The students became part of our team and were integral to our success. We had a lot of fun, and we immersed into the lives of our patients and their families. But it was clear that something had to change, that the time of percutaneous systems with their limited life of ultimately breaking and needing to be replaced, while having to service the percutaneous site on the patient's forearms, needed to give way to a permanent solution and a surgical intervention. And I'm going to let Kevin Kilgore talk about that next. Well, in the short time that I've had, I've left off so many people and I blurred so many facts. But don't worry, for myself and for you fellow speakers, Hunter right now, whether he looks like it or not, is frantically rewriting the end of his day talk, because he's making sure to correct all the mistakes and all the memories that we all get wrong here. He can't help himself. It wouldn't be Hunter if he didn't do that. So as I hand this off to my friend and colleague Mike Keith, I'll leave you with this request. Please stand for the first thanks and ovation to Hunter Peckham, a person who has shared with us so many lessons, bestowed on us so many gifts. Please rise. Give Hunter Peckham a standing ovation. I know, at some point I'm going to pay for all this.
Thanks so much, Jeff. You stayed pretty much on target there. That was great. Okay, our final speaker in this session is Dr. Michael Keith, MD. Mike is an orthopedic surgeon with the Metro Health System and professor in the departments of orthopedics, biomedical engineering, and physical medicine rehabilitation at Metro Health Medical Center and Case Western Reserve University. As we just heard, Mike was recruited back to Cleveland after doing a fellowship in Philadelphia, specifically to expand the hand surgery program, and was immediately brought into the neuroprosthesis research. Mike has really developed all of the surgical techniques that we have used for many years in doing implants of neuroprostheses. He has worked with Hunter since 1976 as a collaborator and is responsible for the surgery, obviously, and safety, and has been involved deeply in the development of the FES devices. So he also has always regarded Hunter as his best friend and as a role model, really, for a scientist and public figure for the health and welfare of persons with spinal cord injury. So, Mike.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all very much for being here. I hope this is the right way, okay? I see this as, in many ways, an opportunity for me to summarize my gratitude to Hunter, but it also overflows into everyone in this room who has contributed to the FES programs, either as a subject or a patient or one of the providers here. So, once upon a time, in a small community of scientists and medical collaborators far, far away, the start of a new technology was born in the crucible of imagination from stainless steel, silastic, silicon, and electrons. Ignited by a combined spark of electrical signaling, probably came from Tom. New materials, microsurgery, and microtechnologies, a worthy group with neurologic injury, was transformed to healthy function and happiness. During this period from 1975 to 1990, the period I've been asked to comment on, we faced a lot of challenges, not the least of which is we were small and had to grow. The Rehabilitation Engineering Center, which did recruit me after Hunter and I sat on a bed together over at the old Highland View Hospital and talked about the dreams and what we might be able to achieve during our lives. I got recruited, or as we say in the tech industry, I got signed up. There was some support locally. It hasn't been mentioned yet. I'll try to mention as many people as I can from this period of time. Dr. Alvin Freeafer was my Metro Health chair, and Byron Marsley, who led the lower extremity FES program at the VA, both chaired that the promises we made could possibly come true. Our real administrators from this time were Laura Polachek, Chris Danielski, who kept us organized and chased us down for meetings, even assigned graduate students to wait outside the door and take me by the hand. Every decision that we made during that time had to be reviewed over and over again. It was new ground. It had never been done before. There were no precedents. There was no time for failure. This first grant clock was always running. It was all we had. All the steps we took had a reviewer and a critic. And the design of the first human neuroprosthesis was indeed, this is an insider's message, drafted on napkins at the Henniker engineering meetings and drawn out in pen. Our electrogeometry started as runny ink spots with welcome ambiguity as to the design. It was Bill Memberg translated a lot of that into actual parts. There's no end to the good work that was done. The harder we worked, the luckier we got. Success begat success with iterations of invention clothed in patient safety, which was my job. There were so few of us in this early time that everyone thought that the whole thing was their idea. And I think that's a real truth. Everybody had a piece of the action. I never disabused anybody of the right to be great because it works. Our relationship survived too, more than just friends together. Everyone thought and today thinks that Hunter is their best friend. You'll hear that repeated over and over again. Lucky you and me for that. I remember a time when others thought that Hunter and I were actually only one person, Mike Peckham or Hunter Keith, and we got called by that at meetings. Obscurity worked for a while, but eventually we had to act out on our own. Hunter was always preaching togetherness, creating a broadly based, university-linked regional giant. Always very hard to keep everyone happy, though, because they also thought they invented it. Anyway, if you'll remember, we had portable sponsorship signs that we put in behind us whenever we were doing an interview. And the one that had the most fingerprints on it was the VA, by the way, who wanted a lot of credit. I referenced a book periodically in our discussions called The Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder, detailing the development of a computer company called Control Data and DEC. He had a recruitment process he called signing up, much like the formation and organization of our FES community. And I saw when I was reading the book exactly what was happening. We were being asked to volunteer to do more than we could be paid for, and to donate a lot of time and effort. And frankly, if you get the right people, it works. So what was new back then? We started with the surgical management of percutaneous electrodes, since that was the best technology we had, and we thought it was better than stimulating muscles through the skin or nerves through the skin. And we didn't have the technology to implant electrodes on nerves inside the body. We also didn't have the technology to put batteries in the body. We had to create a power system that worked from the outside. We did define the advantages of implanted technology in the multi-center clinical trial that was mentioned. And thanks to Kevin Kilgore, the grant master and author we all know so well, we were able to transfer that eventually to what he's going to describe this morning. We were designing electrodes for stability, precision, recruitment, safe lead pathways, serviceability. Somebody had to fix it. It was me if it didn't work. Resilience and longevity, and we were successful. We had good studies that showed longevity especially. We invented insertion tools, infection protocols, techniques as a model for future generations of surgeons, one that we transferred eventually to over 35 centers around the world. We were right about materials and biocompatibility. We didn't get into trouble there. Others did and had to abandon their efforts. We did animal studies before we did human studies, constantly requested by the NIH, NSF, and others. And I did animal studies on stuff that was already accepted medical behavior, but they wanted to see it in a grant. There was also the problem of our competitors, and there were many at that time, claiming originality, ingenuity. One got nominated for the Nobel Prize, and claiming great commercial value, and so on. You might ask, where are they now? So what was not known? What did we have to discover in parallel to treating people and trying to make them actually better? We had the problem of the changing spinal cord injury. What at one time was simple management of a broken neck, namely Hippocrates said you don't treat it, to the more World War II idea of you put people at bed for 6 months and eventually their spine's healed. And then as I was entering this field, surgical management, which worked, and it worked great. People got out of the hospital quicker, they healed better, and they didn't have a progression of their neurologic lesion. We found bacterial resistance to antibiotics, biofilm makers being the worst, and the idea that we knew we were going to have multiple implants as this thing developed. There were also the problem of false hopes raised by others about how much we could do with what we had. We used and deployed many techniques: nerve transfers, tendon transfers, repair of the spinal cord, brain stimulators, magnetic stimulators, surface stimulation braces, and hybrid devices. They all had their innovation debut and then found and lost their place in clinical management in many cases. We saw changing neurologic stability, not complete injuries, but incomplete injuries or partial injuries, many of which could get better than the patient originally presented. So we had to be very cautious about patient selection. Our study model was called Asia American Spinal Injury Association classification, but over the time we had to be much more selective as this was the more common spinal injury. We included new pharmacology like Botox into our plan, and we have since created a large patient care plan that involves many departments and many practitioners. So what we expected to be all on our shoulders has become a giant project for which we have many supporters, and we're very grateful to them, especially the Department of PM&R. Patient expectations changed. In the beginning, there were many skeptics. Some people were comfortable sitting in a chair being treated by an attendant, and we had others in the same group of patients who wanted to be completely cured at the same time by whatever it is we had to offer. Obviously, we didn't have that technology, but we were working on it. Outcome studies, which was the use of surveys to ask people how well they were doing and whether what they had done really worked, came along at this time. And we were very fortunate that Ann Bryden took on the job of becoming the world leader in patient evaluation and study design for spinal cord injury. Later, this turned into a PhD, and now she's Dr. Ann Bryden. And we're very grateful to her for doing that. Kathy Stroh, who was our therapist at that time, developed a standard of measuring and reconstruction, the grass release test, which is now used around the world. A lot of things that have been mentioned have also been tried. I want to mention a couple things about Hunter, just because this may be my last chance to talk to him as a longtime career friend. Everyone who Hunter worked with came to think of him as their best friend. He treated everybody the same, respected, encouraged, and respected again. In assessing the success of the project over time, it's significant that a lot of people from this early era were captivated and have stayed on throughout their careers, a great rarity in science. Our responsibility for people with spinal cord injury and the drive to help them overcame their challenge for a lifetime. And you could even think that some of what we had was religious thinking, a devotion, a priesthood. I'm going to run out of time here, so I'm going to just say what I wanted to say the most. We mentioned Jim Jadich, who was our greatest patient, a real pioneer, and I'm glad that we all had him. Once upon a time, I'll leave you with these thoughts. When my mother was young, she once told me her father took her for a boat ride. They rode to the center of a lake in Tokyo to be alone together. He said that everyone is really three people. There is the person the world knows and judges for their achievements and their name. Then there is the person who their family knows, hidden from other people, but with responsibility, morality, character, abundant love, and guidance for growing and living a private life. And then there is the third person that only the individual knows, including all the aspirations, failings, vulnerability, self-criticism, and pride, but careful not to take all the credit. Every day we live all these three lives ourselves, yet we never reveal them all, so that only Hunter really knows what's going on inside. But it's been great. Okay. Hunter convinced me and so many others that he also had the heart of a physician, had the highest professional qualities, displaying caring, confidence, resourcefulness, and accepting responsibility for the person, not just the experiment. His example was passed to his students and colleagues for their benefit. He could be trusted, and I mean by everyone, administrators, patients, colleagues. He created a pathway to a better life for many people and restored human potential. He showed the world a different and better way to recover from a devastating injury and restore independence, autonomy, and creativity. Few of us will have the chance in their life and career, but many of those heroes who do are still with us at the FES Center. So I was going to do 3 cheers, but the stand up and clapping was better. The world's first implanted upper extremity neuroprosthesis was unrealized until 1986, long after I had first started, but I was there for the birth of that device. As you will see soon in these talks, how the world influences the young engineer from upstate New York who had yet so far to go in his career. So thanks, Hunter. I hitched my wagon to a star.
Thank you, Mike. I just have a few comments, then we have some time for questions. First of all, I want to say these guys are very modest, okay? It's kind of hard to describe what happened during that time. Hunter too, but he's not speaking. I mean, you know, everything that we take for granted today was discovered and developed during this period of time, right? So electrodes, we just take them for granted. We're still using percutaneous electrodes, by the way. Not for everything, but we use them a lot. User interfaces, which we didn't really talk too much about. You know, the whole idea of how does a person tell their hand and arm what they want to do. The fatigue, how to do a clinical trial. I mean, that is not a trivial task, especially in an academic environment. Students that are really fully embedded into this sort of engineering rehab project. So very modest. I want to say this was a very seminal time for the neuroprosthesis world. And I guess the last thing that comes out in all this is this was really transdisciplinary activity before that word kind of existed, right? So this was just the natural way to do it. And Hunter is responsible for pulling all these people together. So the last thing I'm going to say before we'll take some questions is if you were involved in neuroprosthesis development and deployment during this time, stand up. So a lot of these people were mentioned, but not everybody. And look, they're still here. They came back and they're involved in what we're doing today. So thank you all for your contribution. Oh yeah, you can also raise your hand. That was a bad move on my part. Okay, we have some time for questions, I think. What time is it? Yeah, we have time. We have about 5, 7 minutes for questions or comments. You want to do a rebuttal, Hunter? Okay. So we have a question here. Okay, Ron Triolo.
Yeah, I have a question for you three guys up there, and maybe Hunter too. In my interactions with Hunter, he refers to things as often as moonshots, right? What's your moonshot? So I'm wondering if in 1979 or earlier, was hand grasp, an implanted system for hand grasp, in your mind as a moonshot, or is it something that evolved as you made turns according to GPS if it was around back then? Did you know where you were going, and did you have that vision to begin with?
So from my perspective, you know, Ron, everything was right in front of us. Hunter, although had the vision, he was working with engineers in the late 70s to develop implantable systems. But from my perspective, we just were hanging on there, you know, because we had so many, you know, activities going. So I don't know if we even thought of a moonshot, but it was clear, as I mentioned in my talk at some point, this concept of having percutaneous technology was not going to sustain us, and Hunter knew that, and we needed to move over to what we called the implantable system, which we kept thinking was going to be in 1983, then 84, then 85, and Brian Smith finally said it's ready, and it's 1986.
I can tell you that it's certainly clearly a moonshot retrospectively, especially because so much, as I said, was unknown. And one thing sticks in my mind, and that was when the original neuroprosthesis was being evaluated by FDA. And we were all at a panel, at which point everybody had a comment to make from the panel. And someone asked about the quality of the program. And one of the reviewers said, well, all I can tell you is it's better than what we did on the space shuttle. Enormous dedication to quality. That puts it in the category of the moonshot.
Oh, can I have a follow-up? Thanks. That's really insightful. I'm also wondering maybe each of you can comment on, since there were turns in the road and this wasn't a goal you had from the outset necessarily, what was the most surprising thing you discovered that in hindsight that surprised you at the time, and then also kind of gave you the biggest nudge towards the moon?
Well, and I alluded to it, you know, we just thought percutaneous systems were required. You know, you go through now today, you know, percutaneous or trial systems for neuromodulation, they're required. The light bulb coming off, the major shift that we had was when we started talking about not needing percutaneous systems. And, you know, that was a monster argument. How could you go and put a fully implantable system in a person without knowing that their hand actually worked first? But we generated enough confidence in what we had accomplished through the percutaneous trials to say, that's right. The time, the effort, the energy to support percutaneous technologies and then move on to an implant were just too great. Mike gave us enormous support because he was, as he mentioned, he was working with Hunter and Brian in these animal experiments developing the implantable system. So, but that was a huge, huge break. In hindsight, it doesn't look like a big deal, but it was a monstrous point, at least from my perspective.
I think from the clinical side, when we were developing this, there were nations and populations in the world who did not believe in artificial anything. For example, I'll give you Japan because I knew that well because we worked there. And in that country at the time, the mindset was For example, a woman would not be told if they had a serious disease like cancer. The doctor would tell her husband, and then they would decide whether or not to tell her for fear of upsetting her. In Japan, people did not want total joint replacements. They wanted to live with whatever they had and developed, and arthritis, or go to a nursing home. Whereas in other countries who had seen what happens, the remarkable things that happen when you have a joint replacement, they thought, sure, bring on the next kind of implantable technology. And there were those in this country who felt that percutaneous systems were still too fragile and visible, and they wanted to see it all hidden in the body and just to go into the operating room and come out a completely changed individual. So the adoption of neuroprostheses, among other kinds of prostheses, dramatically changed over this period of time. And today we have Dexcom glucose monitors with percutaneous interfaces, and all the total joints that you can imagine have been designed and are put in. And again, we now have batteries, and we now have microelectronics, and we now can program implanted devices. That has changed enormously and has really been one of the things that helps our patients and our technologies be adopted.
When I was a student, I saw all this happen. And it was, the interesting thing was the crowd that I kind of worked in and lived with. One of the things you did, you always tried it on yourself or a graduate student first. So the origin of these percutaneous electrodes started with an effort to record EMG as a control signal that was intended to be able to control that pneumatically powered exoskeletal structure that Reswick and his students had constructed. And the idea came from a guy named Basmazian up in Canada who had used straight fine wires. And so Bill McLeod, who came to work after his PhD, he tried those wires, straight wires, and they could record a signal and perform some control structures, tasks with this pneumatically powered structure. But the problem is the straight wires, they're fine wires, about 25 microns, as I remember, maybe 30 microns in diameter. They broke. And Reswick, which I always admired, I loved his solutions. To me, he was an engineer's engineer. He said, we can take these, why don't we take this instead of bending torque where they failed, let's change it into a torsion in here on the material. So he wound it, and in those days we spoke of it as the wire for your telephone. You remember, is that long stringy thing there with a coil in it? So that's the way we described that electrode, and it was his idea to implement that. And then Charles Caldwell, one of Reswick's students, built a whole series of structures, and that you could wind one piece of wire on the other, and now you had a bifilar recording electrode that had good sound, noise rejection on it because of the way it was constructed. And it was only, I guess, in the point where we had now moved this to, well, one of the things that was important, we weren't getting infections. And that surprised everybody. And that was, we just had no idea about it, accepted it, and put it in. When we got to the point of trying this idea of putting electrodes in to electrically activate paraspinal muscles in an effort to correct scoliosis, we now had a different wire. We were using multi-strand wire. And there was a series of experiments done by
Babetchko.
no, Babetchko.
Yeah, it's on the spine.
Oh, that was the idea brought over. But they were Babechko, as Mike calls it, as reminds me, they implanted a Medtronic stimulator. We went at it with percutaneous electrodes. That was our workhorse. I'm trying to come up, you're seeing an old man's memory failing right in front of your eyes. This is what's so bad now about aging. His first name was Joe, anyway, he did a very extensive work on how what the electrode looked like in the tissue reaction around it. What happens with the helically wound, tissue grows into this and stabilizes this electrode so that it doesn't piston in and out of the skin. Where if you put a straight wire in there, it's going to, as your muscle moves, it's going to piston. So the tissue grows in there, and with this structure, it grows in right there just below the skin, about a millimeter below the skin. You start seeing this tissue ingrowth. And that forms a seal that bacteria can't move through in there in because that's a pipeline to the outside world, that wire running through your skin. But with this structure that didn't move in their piston as it moved, it would stay in there for, well, years. So it became a workhorse for us, and it's a great tool that Reswick showed us how to do that.
Well, thanks, Tom. I think we could stand here all morning and talk about all the discoveries that were made during this period of time. Really and truly, it was a really productive time. But time to move on. So let's thank our speakers this morning. And I'm going to turn it back over to Joe.
Thank you. What a terrific panel. I'm sure that, Tom, there'll be plenty of opportunities for people to talk more over lunch and during the breaks. So I'm pleased to introduce our next panel. It's our discussion. The session is the history of neuroprosthesis implant program, and it'll be provided by Dr. Kevin Kilgore. He is the P. Hunter Peckham, PhD, and George J. Pica, MD, PhD, professor in biomedical engineering with the Department of Orthopedics and the Department of PM&R at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine and the Metro Health System. Kevin was a graduate student of Hunter's in the 1980s and has worked together with Hunter on neuroprosthesis for spinal cord injury for the last 40 years. Please welcome Kevin Kilgore.
Okay, so yes, it's, thank you. It's true that I did my master's degree with Hunter, my PhD with Hunter, worked with him ever since. Definitely not the professional advice that anyone would give you, but you know, I got to work with Hunter for 40 years. I got to work on a really great project. I have not regretted a minute of it. So sometimes you have to do what's personally important rather than what is professionally advantageous, right? Sometimes that's a lot better. So I am going to give a bit of history lesson. Sorry about that, but this is for all the youngsters about our implant, generations of implants since the mid-1980s up through now. And if you know Hunter, you know that when he would give talks, at least summary talks anyway, he would always have the Peckham P's. And so I had to have a P here. So this is Peckham's prostheses. And it's our implanted systems from 1986 to the present. So I don't know if I didn't ask Hunter if this is really his goal, but basically, this is the goal of the program. Enable people to be more functional. People with cervical level spinal cord injury, their hands are paralyzed, their hands can be stimulated, you can give them hand function, they can be more independent. And I would say that every grant and every task that we did was subservient to this goal. And so regardless of what the grant said, this was our goal. We didn't worry too much about specific aims. Those are for researchers. So, you know, the overall trajectory I hope you see from the things I'm going to talk about was really guided by feedback from the users of the technology, which includes the people with spinal cord injury and also the people who had to put it in and make it work and so on. And I put up here this picture because I feel like there were two, a surgeon and a user who really, I don't know if casting a long shadow is the right word, but really influenced greatly the trajectory of this program over the years. One is Mike Keith, who you just heard from not long ago, hand surgeon, and certainly guided us a lot in terms of how to make these things practical for surgeons to implant, and then serviceable, you know, to point out to the engineers, things are going to fail, even though the engineers said, well, these will last forever. They won't last forever, and they have to be replaceable, and Mike Keith was really instrumental in those kinds of guidance. The other is Jim Jadich, whom we've already heard mentioned. Jim was an individual with spinal cord injury. He was involved in almost every step of the things that we did in terms of research, and I'll show you some of that as we go through that. But he was very good at you know, helping us understand the things that worked on a practical basis, and helping us understand the things that didn't work and that we needed to change and the directions we needed to go. So first, why did we go to implantables? And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there was a certain amount of maintenance that was required with the percutaneous systems. You couldn't just put it in and forget it. And so implant systems had this promise of being that kind of a thing, that you could put it in and it could last forever, for the person's lifetime, and you wouldn't have to mess with it. And frankly, by and large, that's pretty well true. Certainly there are times where it needs to be fixed, but generally these implants can last for a long time, and actually you'll hear from some people who've had implants in their bodies functioning for a very long period of time. So here's maybe the history from 1986 through the present. And depending on how you slice it, there's really 3 generations or maybe 4 generations of implant systems. The first, and there's a typo here, that's supposed to be implantable receiver stimulator, IRS-8. So the engineers gave these things names, which means the names are terrible, IRS-8. But when it became a commercial product, it was known as the freehand system. First implanted in 1986, Jim Jadich, I'll show you that, was implanted. And then they were implanted in Cleveland through 2003, actually. The star there is when pre-market approval from the FDA was received, so they became a commercial product from 1997 on. And then we developed the implantable stimulator telemeter, and there were 2 flavors of that. That's the IST-10, again, named by engineers. These never got fancy names. So IST-10 from 1997 through 2000, and then the IST-12 from 2003 till 2013. And then finally, our current generation of implant, the network neuroprosthesis, implanted first in 2016 and up to the present. So those are continuing. In fact, we have another implant in a few weeks. So the IRS-8, or freehand system, invented by Hunter, certainly input from lots of people in this room. I'm sorry if I left you off. As mentioned before, Brian Smith buried in some basement of Bingham building, I think, creating these things. You know, it's kind of crazy. And this was all manufactured a case. And completely built at the university. And with the first human implant, August 26, 1986. Think about this, like, would you be willing to undergo surgery for this device that was built by Brian Smith in some weird globe lab but Jim did that. It's really, I give him a lot of credit for that. So a little of history just to explain how these systems work, in part to kind of guide you through the steps here. The implanted components are on the left in the arm. So there's a stimulator in the chest and then 8 electrode leads that go down the arm to electrodes on different paralyzed muscles in the forearm. There were no batteries inside of the system. So all the power had to be supplied through an inductive link. So you had to wear a coil, that's that circle over the chest, and then that was connected to an external power source. The thing that's different about this kind of an implant, say compared to a pacemaker or spinal cord stimulator, is that the user has to have intimate real-time control over the stimulation. So when you're using your hand, you need to be able to reach out, open your hand at a certain time. You've got to have control over that and be able to close your hand at the right time. So what's unique about this system, or one of the things that's unique, is that you have to have a control source that is immediate. And Jeff has talked about, I think, a whole variety of different ways to control the system that were known prior to the implant. But basically, we had to make a decision, pick one, and the workhorse at that time was shoulder position control. So the person had to wear this shoulder position transducer or controller, we called it sometimes. It's basically a joystick that's taped to the chest, picks up shoulder motion. So the idea was when the person lowers their shoulder, the stimulation would be such that their hand would be open, and then as they raise their shoulder, their hand closes. So they have real-time control over that. A lot like a cable-driven prosthesis. And so those were the things that had to be worn on the outside of the body. Here's what the implant looks like. A lot of things borrowed from pacemakers, really, in terms of the materials and so on, the concepts. The leads.
I can hear you.
As Jeff mentioned and Tom was talking about just a moment ago, the leads are the best ever. I mean, they just are. I'm telling you, they live forever, and there are going to be people that you will see up here that are a testament to that. Those things don't break. Other aspects might, but not those leads. There's a connector there. Again, probably, I'm sure somewhere Mike Keith said, you have to have a connector on this thing. There's no way I can implant 8 electrodes all physically fixed to something else, and what if one of them fails? I wasn't part of those early meetings, but then there are 8 electrodes, which you see here. You see here, one of the electrodes is shown in this diagram. And here's the 0 gram. This is Jim Jadich's arm, and showing the implanted stimulator, the wires coming down with a connector site on the inside upper arm, inside of the upper arm, and then the leads coming down, and the black discs that you see, those are the electrodes on the different paralyzed muscles. So here's another picture of Jim. Here you can see what the person had to wear on the outside. So the kind of pink colored disc on Jim's left chest, that's the inductive coil. So that's what powers the implant and provides the communication. And then on his right shoulder is the joystick. So that is taped onto the shoulder, picks up shoulder motion, and there's a button there to turn things on and off and so on. So all of that has to be worn by the user in order to make the system active. An interesting point is Jim was the first in 1986 to get this implant. The second person wasn't implanted until 1991. So for quite a while, Jim was the only one, and during that time, in the late 80s, was when we did the percutaneous multi-center trial. And so Jim was kind of on his own, if you will. But so we did implant number 2 in Cleveland in 1991. We started a multi-center trial of the implant 1992. I have no idea why in the world we felt like we could do that, but we did. The first implant outside of Cleveland was in 1993. So we will have, after the break, lived experience panel. One of the members of the panel is Jeanette Green. Jeanette was implanted with the IRS-8 freehand implant June 1st of 1994. I think she was the first person implanted in Baltimore. And so she will be joining us. Her system is now 30 years old, still functioning, the same device, still working. Jeanette also has, I'll come back to this a little bit later, but Jeanette also has the third generation, the current generation implant, network neuroprosthesis, and that was implanted about 6 years ago, and she can talk about that as well. So I thought I'd put in here some guideposts about, what caused us to go from the first generation to the second generation. I mean, the clinical results, which I'm not going to talk about here. I don't know if Hunter will talk about them over lunch at all, but they're spectacular. Like, in the worst case, 98% of the participants improved in their independence. And most measures, it was 100%. Like, that's unheard of. Like, that's kind of ridiculous, really. What it tells you is we have a really good screening process, but the point is, it was working well, and so why did we change it? And there were a lot of driving factors, again, from as we would talk to the users. I wish I could say we did this like, very organized way, but really it was just as we worked with people in the lab often, this is the kind of feedback that we got. One is you wanted to make the surgery shorter, so we moved from the epimesial electrodes to intramuscular electrodes. And a lot of these things were graduate student projects. As a graduate student personally, when I was a student, I didn't know any of the overarching plans. So Hunter had those visions, but each one of us was working on a thing that ultimately, as you look back, you say, oh, that was a pretty good idea that we did these intramuscular electrodes. Bill Memberg, who must be around here somewhere, developed this electrode as part of his master's project and tested it. And it's still used today. The big feedback that we got, I would say, universally from the users of the IRS-8 freehand system was they didn't like the shoulder controller. It was taped on the chest, it would fall off during the day, and then you couldn't use your hand. You had to position it in the right spot, or it would work differently each day. And so people said, do something with that, make that different. And so we started looking at other alternatives. We knew there were plenty of other ways to control the system. We started looking at wrist control. But really the big thing was, is there a way to make the control source implanted so you don't have to wear this thing on the body? And that's what led to the implanted joint angle transducer. Let's see, that was Mark Johnson's project, and then Niloy Badra's project. So again, all of these things get developed over the years. Also, people wanted more function. So they wanted to be able to reach overhead. So we started stimulating triceps. Again, that was, I don't know, 3 or 4 different grad student projects over the years, looking at finger intrinsic muscles to refine grasp ability. So I just have a couple slides, examples from this time in basically the mid-90s, looking at wrist control. So we just took the shoulder controller and stuck it on the back of the wrist, and that seemed to work pretty well. This is Jim Jadich's hand, by the way, so demonstrating Again, he was involved in almost every single one of these steps. But this worked really well, and people liked it, and it was much more intuitive than the shoulder control. Stimulation of triceps for overhead reach. Again, here's Jim Jadich. He must have had electrodes implanted in his triceps, probably percutaneous electrodes, demonstrating the ability to reach overhead and then grasp things. So that brought us to this second generation implant, the implantable stimulator telemeter. And the big step here is that the sensor is inside the body. But we didn't think that it was possible to get the power inside, so it still had to be powered from the outside, and all the processing, or most of the processing, was done outside the body. The first version, flavor of this, if you will, is the implantable joint angle transducer, or IJAT, and we put it in the wrist. The plan was, as I recall, to originally put it in the shoulder and just replace the shoulder controller, but the wrist was working well. The wrist was a little easier to conceive of how you might put this implanted sensor in there. But the plan was always, well, eventually we'll start putting them in the shoulder and every other joint in the body. So here's what that system looked like. Again, the same kind of an implant, but now we added a couple more channels, so we had 10 channels of stimulation. We could add the triceps easier into the whole system. But the big step was this implanted joint angle sensor, which was in the wrist. So the signals are sensed inside the body. They're then transmitted out of the body, processed outside in this what is it called, on this external control unit, and then sent back into the implant for stimulation. The great thing about this system is what it looks like to the user. So from the user's perspective, now the only thing you have to wear is this coil, which is pretty simple, a lot easier to put on and position on the chest, easier to keep it, in one spot on the chest. And so this was a big step, and everybody did like this. Like, they really appreciated only having to have this coil to put on and not the shoulder controller. Here's what the implanted sensor looks like. There's a magnet that's in a capsule in one of the carpal bones, and then a magnetic field sensor that's in the radius. Niloy Badra and Mike Keith, I'm sure, spent many late nights trying to figure out how to get this thing in. And this was implanted in, that sensor was implanted in 4 different people. Here's one, Chad Johnson, using that implanted sensor to reach overhead. So he's got tricep stimulation, he's got wrist control with an implanted sensor. So, of course, we were really thinking about a wide variety of things at that point, and we wanted to add myoelectric control. It seemed like people wanted additional functions. They wanted overhead reach, they wanted pronation, supination, wrist control. So how are you going to control all those things? You really needed more control options. And myoelectric control, recording the activity from voluntary muscles, seemed like a good choice, because there could be quite a few muscles potentially in the forearm, but also the head and neck that could be used for control sources. So we said, all right, we'll add myoelectric control to this thing. And so we'll have a joint angle sensor, myoelectric control. But there were some issues, or desire, I would say, to reduce the surgical complexity. And as we did these IJAT implants, we would ask ourselves, can this be transferred to other places, to other surgeons? And it wasn't clear, that was going to be easy. So eventually, really what drove us was funding considerations. In order to get grants funded, we had to really focus on the myoelectric control initially. And the plan was always then, well, we can always go back and add this joint angle sensor to the whole system. That was 25 years ago, and we still haven't done that. I don't think that's going to happen. Myoelectric control, it turns out, works really well for this purpose. And we always wanted more functions, so we were adding more channels, so we moved to 12 channels with the IST-12. So again, These were student projects or staff projects. I'm guessing Ron Hart probably worked on this one, recording from the skin surface to see, can we actually use this signal to control grasp? Again, this is Jim Jadich's hand. I'm sure he had to, sit in the lab and with EMG electrodes all over the place, trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So the IST-12 implanted from 2003 to 2013, a real workhorse, frankly, for us. And although in the upper extremity we stopped in 2013, it still continues to be implanted, I think, even today, for other uses and other purposes. Here's what it looks like, very similar to the IST-10, except now instead of the implanted sensor, you've got the recording electrodes, usually from a muscle in the wrist, if the person has a forearm wrist extensor that is under voluntary control, and then muscles from the head and neck. Usually the platysma works pretty well. We've kind of settled on those things. Here's what the implant looks like. The IST-10 and 12, they look the same from the outside. And very similar construction, the same good old leads, no reason to change what was working. Those things worked great, and they still do. And we had to add a recording electrode. Again, the designs and those things were student projects and staff development over the years. So here's one of the users with the IST system, just showing the wrist control. You can see the signal from the wrist extensor on the screen on the right. So as she extends her wrist, that fires the muscle, and you pick up that signal and use that to control the closing of her hand. And then as she relaxes it, she can release. And it works really well and is actually quite intuitive for people. So it's, frankly, we are still using essentially this system here, except we're implementing it with newer technology, but it's the same concept as what we're using today in 2025. So that video is from Annette Coker. Annette is here and is part of the lived experience panel. Is Annette already here? I'm not sure, but anyway, she will be here in a few minutes. And she received the IST-12 implant December of 2003. And then she became the first person to have bilateral IST-12 implants, and that was November of 2004. So both of her implants are now more than 20 years old and still functioning. We also started then adding more functions, so adding the ability, we put two implants in a person, one in the chest and one in the abdomen, to provide hand function and then trunk function, like sitting up from a forward lean, that kind of function. For some people, it's standing. So this person has a C6 level injury. He's got an implant in his chest for hand function, and then an implant in his abdomen for standing and transfer type functions. And Maria Sutter, who also has an IST-12 implant implanted in March of 2007, is part of our lived experience panel member. I think she's coming in virtually. She lives in Florida. By the way, this is just an aside. Hunter had 50 years to figure out when to retire. Why did he decide to do it in the middle of January? You could have picked a better time, Hunter, like any other time. That's just an aside. All right, but anyway, Maria's joining us from Florida virtually, which is probably very intelligent. Okay, last transition is to the current system. And what was really happening here is we were providing people with multiple functions. And at some point, you do have to ask yourself, like, can you have a device that has like 50 electrodes coming in and out of it? And how in the world do you put that in surgically and so on? It doesn't work. Like, we realized this is not going to work. And we wanted to give people, in addition to hand, trunk, bladder, cough, whatever else we could think of. And that's the trajectory we were going in. So you really need a distributed system. You need a modular system. We wanted to be able to customize this to each individual's needs, and that was quite varied. And so a modular system was really, at that point, absolutely necessary. Like, there was just no question that that's the direction we needed to go. The other big thing was, can we finally get rid of all of the wearable things? So the person doesn't have to put anything on, including the coil, which means getting a power supply inside the body. So short of having to swap a person's liver out with a battery power supply, at this point, it seemed like maybe this could work. And so that's what really led to the development of the network neuroprosthesis. It also meant we had to put all the processing, which we'd been doing outside the body, that all has to be inside the body. So there were some pretty big challenges and a big step change. It took us quite a while to develop the system, first implanted in 2016. And I didn't really show on here like when we started working on the design of these implants. The IRS-8 predates my time here. Only Brian and Hunter probably know. Maybe Bob knows. But Jim, you probably know when we started. But the network neuroprosthesis started design about 1999. So it took about 16, 17 years to get that from scribbles on a napkin to implanted into a person. So NNP system, it's modular, customizable. I do need to wrap up here. So here's a picture of the network neuroprosthesis, the different components. If you want to see it, it's still active. You can come in the lab and we can show you these things. The first implant in January of 2016. It's a big event. A lot of people in the operating room. Drives the scrub nurses crazy, but it really is necessary. Multiple teams, multiple surgeons, engineers, therapists, nurses, all sorts of people that really have to coordinate together to make this happen. And it can never happen without Hunter telling the surgeon what to do. So here it is. Here's Hunter telling, I think that's Mike Keith there, and Mike's not listening. But that's how everything works. So that is a good thing. And you know, a lot of functions are gained with this. So lateral and palmar grasp, overhead reach, seated postural stability, sitting up from forward lean, improved wheelchair propulsion, standing, cough, even blood pressure control, all from, you know, a single system. And I'll just wrap up here with just show you this video. So this is a boring video, frankly. It's just one of our guys eating ice cream. We like to eat ice cream in the lab, by the way. But I hope that as you look at it with his right hand, like it looks pretty normal. If I didn't tell you he was paralyzed and has a C5 level injury, you wouldn't necessarily know. You can't see, there's no wires on the outside, nothing that he's wearing. And the control is pretty straightforward. So, you know, this is really the goal here. Not just eating ice cream, but trying to make this as natural and functional as possible, as easy to use as possible. I mentioned Jeanette Green, who will be part of the lived experience panel. She, again, has the IRS-8 implant that's 30 years old. We left that one alone. Don't destroy something that's still working, but she got the network neuroprosthesis in her opposite arm and then a trunk for standing. And so that's a video of her using that system for standing transfer. And then finally, we have two moderators for a lived experience panel. Ann Bryden, who was here somewhere. I think maybe she had to run out, but and Kim Anderson. Kim received the network neuroprosthesis implant in 2017. And then we have one more lived experience panel member who was just implanted a few weeks ago. So he agreed to come and join us. He is really, like, I think it was just this week, got you know, things programmed to start using his system. So that's pretty exciting. Yes.
The convention requires we give people a break before we go into this session.
Oh, yes, right. Yes, there will be a break. So, all right, I'm wrapping up. Thank you. That was the Joe Pancrazio hook, as appropriate. So I'll just say, you know, Hunter had a vision of of trying to enable people with spinal cord injury to have increased function. And over the years, he certainly had impact on a lot of different people who have received hand function, been more independent, had a huge impact on people throughout their lives in being more independent. And so we will wrap up this session with applause for Hunter for that persevering in that vision. Yeah. Okay, we will have a break, 5 minutes, is that right? 10 minutes. It's going to take us a little while to get everything set up, so give us 10 minutes and we will come back for the lived experience panel. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, yes, that's the panel.
Check. It's not packed. Everything good? Everything good. 9, 10. How you feeling, Chris? We good?
So please take your seats. Thank you. Okay. My usual concept is to talk. Sure. Hello again. So we are proud to present a lived experience panel discussion. Our panel is moderated by Dr. Kim Anderson and Dr. Ann Bryden. Kim Anderson is a professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. She is also a professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Metro Health Center for rehabilitation research and an investigator with the Cleveland FES Center. Dr. Bryden is Associate Professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. She's also Associate Professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Metro Center for Rehabilitation Research. Also is an investigator in the Cleveland FES Center. So I'm going to, at this point, turn it over to Dr. Bryden, who will introduce the life experience panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to introduce our panelists, our discussants for today, all of whom are users of neuroprosthetics with varying ranges of experience. So first I'll go in alphabetical order, sort of loosely. On one of our slides was alphabetical. But I'd like to start by introducing Woody Brooks. Woody Brooks works as a pharmacist, and he's the newest member of our neuroprosthesis community. In November of this past year, he received his implanted networked neuroprosthesis, and currently he's in the early stages of programming and training with the system. Next, I'd like to introduce Annette Coker. Annette Coker is a Canadian with over 30 years of volunteer service on the Humane Society's fundraising committee. She has 25 years of experience training therapy and service dogs, and she's the proud mom of 2 and grandmother of 2. She's been using bilateral neuroprostheses, so one in each arm, since 2003. I'd like to introduce remotely Jeanette Green. She is a recently retired business analyst and a pioneer in the field with a hand neuroprosthesis implant system that was developed at Metro Health and Case Western. Jeanette and her entire team celebrated 30 years of functional use with the device. And then finally, Maria Sutter. Maria has a Master of Arts in Humanities. She currently works as a peer support and community education specialist at a certified independent living facility. Independent living center. She's been using a neuroprosthesis since 2007. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Kim, who has some interesting things to share about priorities and hand function.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for coming to this day to celebrate Hunter. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro about why I focus on upper extremity function. And I'm going to end with a little bit of insight from Hunter. But first, many of you know that I published this survey in 2004, obviously well before Hunter started this in 1972. But I came from the biologic side of spinal cord injury research. And that side, at that time, didn't know a lot about upper extremity function, and they were really focusing on thoracic injuries and lower extremity function. And my goal was to show that community that if you talk to the people living with spinal cord injury, you can learn about what's really important, and that it's more than just one thing that's important. There's a lot of things that are important. And what this study showed is that for people with cervical level injuries, they said regaining upper extremity function was the most important to their improvement in living. And for individuals with paraplegia, they said sexual function was what was most important to them. That study also showed that regardless of how long after your injury, those 2 top priorities were still top priorities. Now, there were other things that changed with time after injury, and that is what is shown here. Well, That was published in 2004. 20 years later, I did a review of the literature because there was an explosion after that of people surveying and asking individuals with spinal cord injuries about what was important. And what that literature review showed from input of over 3,500 individuals with spinal cord injury is that there are some recurring universal priorities. For people with cervical level injuries, arm and hand function, 20 years later, is still the top priority. For individuals with paraplegia, walking movement is very important to them. Bladder and bowel control is across the board important to everybody, and sexual function. What that review also showed is that we looked at what are people's preferences for their priorities regarding interventions for functional recovery. And what we found is that people's priorities are involved with weighing the risks and the benefits of the functions that are most important to them. And I think that's what you're going to hear from this panel, is what they weighed in their decisions to have implanted devices. Because it's not all pros. There are cons with everything. And it's those decisions that impacted their lives and how they were going to incorporate these devices into their lives that you'll be able to hear. But as I said, Hunter started in 1972. And clearly, he was not influenced by me because I was only 1 year old at the time. But I asked him, I was like, well, what was it back then that really drove you to go into upper extremity function? Because you heard from the panel this morning is that Hunter had the vision, and they were already going in to upper extremity. And he's going to, I think, share with you much more details about this, but I want to give you just a little bit of insight of what he shared with me. Back in 1972, he was transitioning from a graduate student to a research associate, and he was assigned lab in the hospital on the SCI unit. And back in 1972, people were in rehab for 9 months, 12 months, and his lab is the lab that had the AC. And so the people, mostly guys, obviously a lot of men are injured more than women, they came and they would congregate in his lab. And by him being immersed with those individuals and listening to them, talking with them about what their life was, what they were doing, what were the practicalities, and he'll share with you some more of that. But it was that, along with everything else that was occurring around him, that really kind of drove him into committing to upper extremity. And that's really important because it's kind of a kindred spirit to me. He was listening to the people. And as many of you who know me, what I've been saying for over 20 years now is that you have to listen to the people to guide the research. And that is why we have over an hour here today dedicated to listening to the people. And now I'm going to hand it over to Anne so she can start the moderation of our lived experience panelists.
Thank you, Ken. That was excellent. I just have a few remarks before we really dive into our lived experience panel. And I started with this group back in 1993. So if you do the math, you can quickly figure out that I've spent many, many more years within this program than the age I was when I actually started. But prior to being an investigator, I spent many years providing occupational therapy interventions and assessments with this really cool new tool that is hopefully providing people with better hand function and better independence. So I bring that up because that means I've had the honor of working with our dedicated research participants all of those years. And I wanted to set the stage for the upcoming discussion by highlighting the significant commitment and dedication that not just the research participants have given, but also families and their support systems to get us here and participating in our research. Participating in research is brave, right? I think as Dr. Kilgore mentioned, you're agreeing to have a surgical implantation of a device that was made by an engineer in a basement of a university, right? So particularly surrounding implanted technologies, it requires a lot of bravery. In research, there also may not be guarantees. Through consent to participate, research participants place trust in us, a large team of stakeholders, engineers, therapists, surgeons, physiatrists, nurses, study coordinators, all of the support people that it takes to make things happen. So our goal is to earn that trust through transparency. So we strive to provide as much information as we can. Of course, we're required by the IRB, but even if we weren't, we want to make sure that people know what they're in for, what the problems might be, what are the risks, how do they weigh against the benefits, as Dr. Anderson had just indicated. So through their consent and research, our participants become an integral part of our team. We don't do research on them, we do research with them. And so this, in particular, is a hallmark of Dr. Hunter Peckham's legacy. This is what I learned from day one coming into the program, is that the people that we are doing research with spinal cord injury are the key members of the team. Some of the most important lessons I learned early on in those days came from Jim Jadich. And boy, was he patient in teaching me about, what life with spinal cord injury meant. As you know, he was the first pioneering participant to have an implanted neuroprosthesis from the morning session. So participating in research is brave, and we try very hard to not take that for granted. Because in our studies, though, most often things go great, right? But every now and again, things go wrong, and sometimes they go pretty wrong. And so it takes the dedication of all of the members of the research team, the participants, the researchers, and the support staff to right the ship again. I'm sorry, the sailboat again, and weather the storm. So it's within this context that I would like to recognize the bravery and commitment of the participants in our programs over the years. Our qualitative investigations have certainly indicated that people are drawn to our research with the hopes of receiving more function. But an almost as strong theme is a sense of altruism. So with that, and by altruism, people just want to pay back. I'm sure you know what that means, but it's a common theme where people say, even if I don't get a benefit, if something you learn from me can feed forward to benefit the next person, that's great. So Dr. Anderson and I are thankful to our panel participants today who are here to share their experience. So I'm going to sit back down and we're going to start the conversation. Thank you. Too? Good, okay. So we decided to group questions kind of in three different categories, starting with, describing life before implantation, and so then talking about experiences around surgery and around the implantation, and then life after implantation. So I think I'd like to start with our first question, and I'm going to direct this to one of our remote participants, Jeanette Green. So I'd like to ask Jeanette to weigh on what was your arm and hand function or your daily life like before you had the implant?
I'm sorry. We weren't able to hear that last bit from you, Anne.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Great. If you would, Jeanette, weigh in on kind of your function prior to getting your neuroprosthesis, as well as some of the factors that went into you making a decision about it.
Okay. Well, I'm C5 quadriplegic, so I had no hand function, and for my neuroprosthesis for the IRSA 30 years ago, I was using splints and cuffs and everything else to use any kind of, for typing, for writing. I couldn't pick up anything. And I just was dependent on people, even at work. I felt like I was bothering people because they have a job to do, and I'd be like, hey, well, can you put this over here for me or do that? Or, you know, so I don't know. I just really needed to have this extra, I don't know, any kind of promise of a new additional function was what I really needed.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure that resonates with our other panelists. So if anybody else would like to weigh in on that, that would be terrific.
I agree with Jeanette. You do rely on a lot of people when you can't do anything. Yet I had to be fed because I couldn't pick up even a sandwich, or if I had a sandwich, they kind of propped it in my hand, and I'm doing kind of teetering and making sure I get to where I need to go. But it's just a prospect of thinking that there's something out there that might be able to just give you that little bit more, to be a little more independent, was all I needed to hear.
Mm-hmm. Woody, can I ask you, since you're more newly, you're closer to that decision-making process, if you wanted to add something?
Along the lines of the decision process? Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'm a little over 3 years out from my injury, so after I became injured, I definitely started looking into the types of treatments, therapies, anything that might help me regain function. But I wanted to make sure that I gave my body the opportunity to regain as much function or recovery as I could initially before deciding to go that route. So it did take me a while to get to the point where I was willing to even consider doing something like a surgically implanted device. I also considered, gave thought to what future developments there might be, so that I didn't want to do anything that might affect future developments and my ability to benefit from those. So it was really a big decision for me to get to where I was willing to consider doing something like this device, this implanted device. But it just, from living this way and then not experiencing the recovery that I had hoped for, at that point I became willing to, okay, let's see what's out there, let's see what's available to help me regain any amount of additional function and resulting independence from that function. So that's where I decided to seek out, becoming a participant in this study.
I could share with you one aspect that went into my decision. I was in the early feasibility trial of the NNP. I met Hunter in 2003, and as Kevin mentioned, I didn't get implanted until 2017. And something that was critical in that decision was that I didn't want any external devices. And so I had to wait for the team to build that. And another thing was that I wanted hand function and trunk function. So I was kind of pressing Hunter. I was like, I want more. And then the third factor that went in, I was working full time. And so I had to figure out how I was going to take, a couple months of downtime and to be able to have the implant and recover from it. So it was a lot of things that were involved in that process.
And I think, too, just to check in with Maria, I know that there are certainly other options that people have, like maybe tendon transfers at that time, but now tendon and nerve transfers. So Maria, do you want to weigh in a little bit about your decision-making with the implant?
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, Woody, that you kind of waited to see what you would get back. And that was exactly my thinking, exactly the way you said it. You know, all of that process that you had just gone through in the past 3 years, I went through in the first 2+ years, 20 years ago. But it was the exact same thought. Like, I want to see what happens to my body, you know, through the rehab, the PT, the OT. And then the way my OT and PT was scheduled at Metro for outpatient, there was an individual who I never knew his name. He was in the OT and PT slot right before me. So he was with my PT, then he'd go over to OT, I'd work with my PT, I'd go over to OT right behind him. And while I wait those few minutes in between, I would, curiosity, you know, eavesdrop on what he was talking with his OT about. And he was going to have these things called tendon transfers. I knew nothing about it, but that's what started my conversation with my OT. And I was sitting here thinking, like, what my days were like before tendon transfers and before the implant. The amount of time I spent, like, throwing my arm with my shoulder was just, I mean, probably hours of my life spent doing that prior to getting my tricep tendon transfers. And then knowing that kind of the next step was this implanted device that I could get. And I remember the very early days meeting with Anne and doing all of these functional tests. Will this thing work? Should I do it on my left hand? Should I do it on my right hand? And like, a lot of it was just going through motions that I didn't quite understand at the time. All just a lot with the hope that things would get more streamlined in my life. So I wouldn't be spending hours like getting washed up at the sink in the morning, because I was determined that I was going to do it by myself, but having to go through all these acrobatics just to do it. And I was listening on live stream this morning to Dr. Keith talking while I was using my implant to put my makeup on to do this panel. And it just all was like very full circle moment for me.
Thank you. Let's move on a little bit and talk about the actual surgical process and what that was like for everybody. For some of you, it's a little bit newer. For a few of you, it's been longer ago. So let's start with perhaps Annette, because I think she is the one who maybe compared it to another life situation that people forget.
I know when I first heard about this, and I came in for my, and they're saying like I had to do all these exercises, and you know, there will be a lot of back and forth. I knew I was going to have to rely on somebody, or a lot of people, to get to that point. I wasn't afraid that I wasn't going to be able to do it, but I was worried about, you know, where I was living, were the girls there going to be as excited as I was to get ready for this surgery. And my sister, who lived in Canada, she was the one that came and drove me back and forth for all of it, basically. And if I didn't have that type of help, it would have been maybe not even a go. But the surgery, all of a sudden they're saying, oh, you're going to have all these people in there, and I'm thinking, oh, why should I worry about it? I'm going to be asleep. But I also pressed them at the time to have both hands, because I thought, why should I have to decide? I need two hands to do a lot of things. So it was kind of a double. Once I got done one, and the second time around, it was a lot easier, a lot more. I knew what I expected. So
for you, it was about 6 months apart. And,
right.
you know, to be clear, we're always having shortages of research devices, right? So, but at that time, we were really, especially with the myoelectric control, very interested in what people could do if they had two arms implanted. But most of the time, there's just kind of a scarcity of devices, or we're waiting for devices. But I think you had also said that as far as the pain, it's the kind of pain you forget, right. Like childbirth.
Yeah.
For at least half of the population, or a portion of half of the population.
Right, right.
So I don't know, being newer, post-surgery, Woody, if you have anything to add.
I didn't have a lot of concerns actually going into the actual surgery. The team gave me all the, you know, I knew they knew what they were doing, so I was just the subject, you know. They were going to do what they knew how to do, so I had no concerns about that. My biggest concerns were post-surgery recovery, and how my wife is my caregiver. We don't have any I say we don't have any outside help, like we don't have any paid help. We have family and friends that help us out a lot, but she is my primary caregiver. So my concerns were more about how are we going to manage during my recovery process after the surgery, you know, with transfers. I was pretty independent with transfers and a lot of things before the surgery. So being down in a whole arm and the little bit that I could do with my hand, how are we going to manage? So that was our primary concerns, and luckily we had a good support team around us. We had therapists that knew I was going to be going through this procedure, that would workshop ideas about how Anne-Marie, my wife, could do my transfers, and just volunteering even to come to the house and help us out if needed. So that part I was not, we had concerns, but you know, we knew we would figure it out. As far as the actual, how I felt after surgery, I was a typical guy. I felt like, you know, I'm going to go through surgery and it's not going to be a big deal. I'll be fine. So I was a little surprised after surgery at the amount of pain and soreness that I had from the actual procedure. But fortunately, that was only like 2 or 3 days afterwards. I've had little to no issues with that since that period. And recovery has been really well. It's gone well. I've had one minor issue with an incision that looked like it was starting to get infected, but outside of that, really haven't had any complications. Been pretty straightforward recovery.
Yeah.
So just getting through the first couple of days with the pain and soreness was the biggest probably issue that I had with the actual surgery. Didn't realize, I guess, going into it how extensive the work was going to be. Oh. Yeah. So.
Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
With us, because you know, like I said, you have been most recently through it. I think what I'd like to do maybe is turn it back to Jeanette, and maybe talk a little bit about what you first felt when stimulation was experienced the first time your system was activated.
Oh gosh, I remember feeling just excitement. It had been 5 years since my injury for my hand. And I just was like, wow, I can actually open and close my hand. And at that time, we were just simulating so I could, I didn't have control right then, but we would put things in my hand and I was like, wow, look at me, I am holding, I can, so I just remember that was a wonderful feeling. And with my trunk system, right away, all of a sudden I was able to, whoa, I can sit up straight and I don't have to try and hook my arm around. It was amazing. It was really a payoff for going through very, uncomfortable recovery and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it just was like, wow, this could be worth it, And it was a long learning curve from that point. But it just gave me that really good hope that, wow, this is pretty cool.
So Jeanette was actually implanted at one of our sites, in the first multi-site trial. So all of her activities took place in Baltimore. And Jeanette, you can't see, but Dr. Peter Gorman's in the crowd, an old friend. So,
hi.
So I know that, as being, external to Cleveland, and of course now you're part of our fold as well, there was a lot of back and forth and trips that you and your mom would make to have the programming done and to be able to get things functional.
Yes, thanks to my mom. I think we were back and forth to Baltimore, like a 2-hour trip every other Friday. That was my Friday off from work, and it was our day. We'd do the lunch, we'd go and have, I don't know, it was a good time.
So would anyone else like to weigh in on maybe that first moment, or maybe even bringing it further to how the neuroprosthesis has impacted your lives?
I guess I can. It was so super stimulating, and I was just so elated. Like Jeanette said, when that hand opened up for the first time, you're actually watching your hand open and close, open and close. And I just wanted to keep doing that, like open and close. It was so awesome. And the impact, it was like going back home and learning how to actually, like Jeanette said, use it. And I was just trying everything, just trying to pick up everything that I could, and like, see, I can do this, guys. It was like, I just wanted to show it off so much. It was great.
It was emotional. When you don't have hands that work, even in my meetings when we would come up prior to having my surgery, we would meet at the tetraplegia clinic, and just getting even just the surface stimulation pads on and being able to see your hand move, I'm pretty sure I cried the first time. It was emotional and exciting. It gives you a lot of hope about what's possible and what's hopefully coming.
I remember I was living in Florida when I had my implant, and I came up here after 3 weeks to have the cast off, and the Z house was brand new back then. And by the end of the week, they had me go over to the Z house, and I was just picking stuff up and out of the kitchen like nothing happened. And I was 29 years post-injury before the time I had the surgery, so I had figured out how to do a lot of stuff. but I finally had force. I finally had strength in the grip, so I could pick something up without having to worry about dropping it. And I think you guys were pretty amazed about how much I was picking up so quickly that first time that you kind of let me go free in the house. So it was a pretty exciting experience.
Some of the things I remember were like, I didn't realize the programming. I mean, you would sit in the lab for hours. And what I found really fascinating was listening to Ron and Ann work together. They had this, like, I don't know, it was like they were talking in code to each other about each of the electrodes and what they're doing and watching your hand and little tweaks. And I really found it quite fascinating because it was really hard to believe that what they were doing on a screen and what they were talking about was like happening in my body and on my body, and just to kind of be part of that hours on end. It didn't really feel like hours on end. I found it really fascinating. And just to, I think just to watch their minds work, and if we do this, this will happen. And what if we do this? Does that happen? And I mean, still to this day, when I come up and we do adjustments, I still find it really fascinating and intriguing. So, you know, what I do on a daily basis with this function is something that is like it's so tiny and precise and technical, but I don't think about it like that on the daily basis. So it's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. Ann and Ron had their own little code language.
Yes.
And it was like, I just watched the screen and let my hand do whatever they were talking about. But yeah,
exactly.
It was amazing, and time would just be gone. And thinking, like for me, it was like, wow, we gotta like think about traveling home soon. But it was quite amazing to watch on the screen, and your hand, like Maria said, your hands just doing whatever they said.
That is something just to point out. People travel a couple hours by road, maybe 6 or 7 hours by road, and then stay with us for a week. Or now, you know, some have to come in from Florida again, and Woody's about an hour and a half out. So these are definite commitments that people make in order to get things working. So let's kind of ease into some of the impacts that people have experienced. I know Woody has just gotten his hand programmed Wednesday, so may not have a whole lot of use experience with his hand quite yet, but I'll open it up to all of you, or if you want to even start with your 2 days of experience.
I'll start. Yeah, I'm just in the early stages of having my hand programmed with some functional grasp patterns. So that was just Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So yesterday was my first day home with it. I really did not get much opportunity to do it, so I just did my normal exercise patterns that I was using up to that point. But just Wednesday being in that visit where they were doing the programming, just like they talked about, with the excitement of watching the computer screen and all the little adjustments that they're making and everything that they have the ability to control with the hand is very exciting for me. I'm excited to be at home and, you know, actually start figuring out what I can do with these functional patterns, these different grasps, and how I'm going to be able to use it. So, like, I'm coming out of that visit on Wednesday, you know, very, very hopeful, very excited to see how I'm going to be able to use this.
So I think Woody's going to find some new things that he can do with his hands. So maybe some of you can weigh in on some of the new things that you were able to do with your system that you could not do before.
All right, I will start. I could go out to a restaurant and actually feed myself. I think that had to be the biggest thing, because it is kind of embarrassing if you think, you know, you're going out and you're some adult and they gotta feed you. And I just couldn't do it. But now I don't even think about it. I go out to the stores by myself. I walk my dog by myself. I just, there's so much. As long as it's within my reach, I can do it, I can get it, and it's fabulous. It's just, I don't know how else to say. You feel so, I know it's not all my independence, but the little bit I do have, just, you feel so much better about yourself.
You know, and that makes me think about it. When you have so little independence in the beginning, any little bit you get is just a big bonus. And I think about, gosh, I can't even imagine. I can't count the number of extra things that I can do since my surgery. And over 30 years, I've just figured out how to do, like, just brushing my hair, brushing my teeth, even with an electric toothbrush, walking my dog, brushing him. Feeding myself, of course, holding a wine glass rather than drinking out of a straw, which is, you know, quite uncivilized. And so just kind of being more, you know, independent throughout the day. I need someone to help me get going in the morning. And I, for my hand, I do have the external components that I put on. But then I'm good to go until nighttime. And I can take a cup of water, fill it up in the sink, and stick it in the microwave for making tea or whatever. I keep the lid on so I don't spill it on myself. It has a hole in it. It's all good. And yeah, no, it's there's just so many things. I can do my makeup, all of this stuff that I used to have somebody else have to do for me. And just like Annette said, eating in a restaurant, I can pick up the fork that's actually there and not have to get somebody to get out my bent fork and cuff and strap it on my hand and all that stuff. So there's just so many things. I have to make a list someday because it really is a lot. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
It's definitely huge. And even still, like every day or every week or every month, there's something new you can do or something better you can grasp or get. And it's still exciting.
And I didn't even mention, with my trunk, I have very low blood pressure. And so when I get dizzy, I can put my trunk on, and it helps with my breathing, with talking. And I have the assisted, stand and pivot, where I can bear weight on my legs, and my assistants can just pivot me and transfer into my wheelchair or into bed. And I feel like, okay, they're not lifting me anymore. That is really, really helpful, because I have women assistants and they're not that strong. So that's amazing. It really is.
Jeanette, that reminds me, and the other speakers can add to this, but what doesn't get measured or published is the impact on other people, the impact on family members or the impact on other caregivers. Annette or Maria, can you guys also expand on how that has happened in your lives?
Actually, I find most anybody that I talk to about this or they see the wires, or they wonder how I could do certain things, they're all usually very excited about learning about the system. And so I find that becomes very helpful, because then all of a sudden they want to really be a part of helping you do what you need to do to get better. So, yeah.
Well, I think you're right. Like, the impact on other people, from the kind of streamlining of not needing people to do as much for you, but also, like, when my first niece was young, one of the things that I would do with her was color. And, you know, I didn't need her to, at 3 and 4, hand me the marker, the crayon, or whatever in color. I just picked it up and put it in my hand and colored. I don't think she ever thought that I was doing something different than her. And I also was able to hold a tennis racket, have a really strong palmar grasp, and I could hit tennis balls to my service dog. And it was an activity that, like, an actual physical activity that I could do with my dog, you know, to interact on a level that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. You know, now I have a chuck it and I throw it all the time with my other service dog. And, like, these are things that aren't, it's not like necessarily a functional independence, but it is like a huge activity that brings a level of enjoyment that really doesn't get measured and doesn't maybe get talked about. And I think those are like some of the greatest things that you learn that you can do with this implant that, you know, wasn't something I talked to Ann about in the beginning, like, what do you want to do with this, but found along the way that I could do. And I would do it all over just for that.
Reducing the amount of help that I need from my wife, going back to what my decision-making process of doing this was, you know, that's probably one of the biggest things I considered, because, as everyone's always said, any little amount of function that you get back gives you that much more independence. And if I can do more for myself and not have to ask my wife to do things for me, I want to do that, because I want to take things off of her plate whenever I can. You know, so if
it's definitely a big consideration.
Just being able to pick something as simple as being able to pick something up off the floor that I've dropped, and not having to yell out to her to stop what she's doing and, you know, come pick that up for me. I mean, just little things like that is, I think, what's going to be most amazing about this, is just taking stuff off her plate, making life a little bit easier for her and for both of us at the same time. Yeah, I'd love to be able to, instead of, you know, her always having to take our dog for a walk, if I can get back to doing things like that, you know, it's going to be exciting. And I look forward to going through the experience that the others up here have talked about with, you know, learning and being able to do things more independently. You know, you talked about going out to eat at a restaurant and being able to feed yourself and not, you know, it's, I look forward to that.
Good, you'll get there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Transition.
Yeah, I don't want to be a bummer, but sometimes, you know, things go wrong, and maybe if some of you wanted to talk a little bit about your experiences with any kind of adverse events. We do go till noon, correct? Okay.
I will say that your health has probably an impact on, you know, if I got a UTI or I've had pneumonia several times, and all these things do play a factor in how your implant works, because your body all of a sudden is, I guess, very different, and you don't have the strength, you don't have the want either. So definitely your health, I found, was one of my biggest, say, cons for having, you know, implanted and trying to work things. It almost like it takes, you're recovering from your illness, but then after that you got to sort of come back and work up your strength to use your implant like you had been. So I found that was probably I really didn't look forward to trying to get myself all back together, but you do. Once you feel better, you do better. So.
So you're saying that in order to be the most functional, your health has to be at its optimum.
You really have to think about, you know, I've learned to try and maybe like if I thought I was getting pneumonia, I was on top of it. I really watched for the UTIs. I really, you know, when COVID was around, I was trying to be very mindful of how my body felt, because if there was any changes, I wanted to make sure I didn't let myself go, because it's so hard to come back after you've recovered.
Yeah, and I think Annette's speaking to what many of you know, that there is a constant surveillance for secondary conditions that people with spinal cord injury are having to partake in.
You know, one thing, go ahead, Jeanette.
Oh, okay. I just want to say, I went into the surgeries with my eyes wide open. Everybody's, make sure we're clear on the risks involved. And for my first surgery, I was lucky. I didn't have any adverse events. I had smooth recovery. Yes, there's some soreness and pain, but it seems like that goes away pretty quickly. But the second surgery with my trunk system, I did have issues with it not working right away, not working properly, and second and third and more surgeries, and some infections, but everything was dealt with. Yeah, it's a bummer each time, but you know, those are things that happen with any surgery. So it's a risk, but you know, there's still the benefits outweigh. So any kind of problems.
I would echo what Jeanette is saying there. One of the negatives of a fully implantable system is that everything is fully implantable. And so when things start to malfunction or whatever, Ron, he is the magician on doing amazing things with the software outside of the body. But at some point, there are some things that you just can't fix until you go inside the body. But you know, going into a research study where you're having implants, the team talks about that with you. And so it may be, it's always hard to do it, but the outcome, and like Jeanette just said, the benefits when it's working really outweighs those negative experiences, at least in my case.
Yeah, since my surgery was just in November, I'm kind of still in that recovery phase, and I'm only within like the last week and a half to 2 weeks, I've really just been able to start getting back to doing my own transfers. I've gone back to the gym, I think 3 times now, and my ability to do in the gym has really decreased. expectedly, but I knew that. I knew a layoff of any kind was going to be a setback in those regards, but hopefully, and I'm certain that that setback is going to be worth the benefits that I'm going to see from having this implant. So
for sure, Woody, because I don't know if you use like cuffs to hold things in the gym.
I do.
You won't have to do that anymore. And the amount of weight you'll be able to use will increase. Like, I mean, my left hand that I have my implant with, the amount of weight I can use in the gym on some apparatus versus my right hand that doesn't have the implant is, I mean, like two different bodies. So
yeah,
it'll be exciting.
I'm excited about it.
We were just joking. We don't know how long it'll take for Woody, and probably you still, Maria, to request some hand closing electrodes in that other arm.
Yes.
That and programming a barbell grip.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your palmar grip is going to do it all. That's what I use.
Good. I'm excited. That makes me happy to hear.
Yeah. I will say, as far as things that were setbacks, I didn't count the amount of times that Dr. Keith said to me, that's never happened, or that's only happened once to me before, and it was 20 years ago. I had very early on an electrode surface, and that's when I got the first Dr. Keith, and the setbacks definitely happen. Some, I think, for some people more than others. I know some of you guys have had to have your system down for a while before things got back up and running. But I have always felt immensely confident in the brains behind the operation, that somebody will figure it out, even if it's well, that's never happened before, or that kind of response. I had to have my system out for a number of years because the system shifted and there was infection, and even though there was several years in between when I didn't have the system in and functioning at all, I always knew that I was gonna get back to having it, I was gonna go through the surgery again and implant it again. And, was it on the schedule I wanted necessarily? No, but sometimes also life happens and you have to account for life. And that is something that I learned with my injury. I learned and accepted maybe earlier than some other things that I am not in control. And I have to be patient sometimes with things. And that is true of the implant process and the recovery process from the implant and some of the setbacks that I've had to experience. So there are negatives, but I definitely have felt like what I've gotten out of it has outweighed some of the moments.
I definitely have to agree on that. I mean, like Maria said, life happens, and I'm usually a very positive person anyway, and I know that Ann, Ron, Mike, I mean, such an exceptional team. You guys out there just took care of us, and when something happened, they were right there. Solve, work through it, fix it, solve. It was great.
So to that point, Hunter's made such a legacy with these systems, and we're not done, right? So knowing that we have younger, newer, talented engineers and therapists kind of stepping in right alongside, lockstep with us learning, we expect that support to continue and to grow. And I thought maybe as a final question, if any of you could maybe weigh in on what you think, what you see, what your vision is for the future of implanted technologies, specifically based on your experiences as a research participant. And I'll just leave it at that.
For me, I've only just begun in this journey, and I only have the implant for one hand. So for me, the future is hopefully, maybe getting additional functions that can be controlled through the use of the neuroprosthetic. I'm definitely interested in, additional trunk stability that could be accomplished through this technology. I know they're looking at bowel and bladder function. I don't know that it's a reality for me, but lower body, lower extremity function. So I'm excited to see where this technology can be used for the other types of function other than the upper extremity.
I mean, I guess if we're thinking about it, I would give anything to just get up off my butt, stand up. It would be phenomenal to see that maybe there's some way they can even find a way around, I guess, the lack of, say, stimulation for the lower extremity that I have anyway, and probably many others, but to still be able to give them something that powers you up and to stand. Because, yeah, it's been quite a while since I've stood up to do anything. So.
One thing I would say for the future generation of researchers and providers out there, which we'll talk about more this afternoon in these sessions, is the dedication that all of these research participants have provided. But what happens as Hunter is retiring? We have more people, but what happens when those people get left behind? And how do we really make this sustainable for not only for the people that have been participants, but for more people out there, so that we can change those priorities, because arm and hand function is no longer a desire, because now we have arm and hand function interventions. So really think about that and everything that all of these participants have done since Jim Jadich in the very beginning. How can we make that endurable?
I definitely agree. I think that that's so important. First, to support everybody, but also to expand this technologies and keep on going from here to all people with different levels of disabilities even. I don't know, there's a big group of people out there who could really have life-changing events.
I agree 100%.
I think I echo that, because I would just like to be able to see it break through, the limitation of, oh, this only helps a small population of people, and so it's not viable to get this to be mainstream technology. How do we get beyond that thinking? And I know in many, many times that has been something that I've heard Hunter's talked about with me. And even though there's a lot of change going on now with the FES Center, a lot of people who are getting ready to move on, not just Hunter, and it's a little scary to think the people that I've relied on for so many years won't be there. It's also a little exciting because if, you know, like they were talking about this morning, if this group of individuals came together with these ideas years ago, they didn't, like, at the time, they didn't really know what they were thinking. They didn't know that they were going to be able to get where they got today. So all these new brains that are coming in, like, what's in their brains? Where could they go? And, like, how will they get there and who will it impact, I think can be really exciting and doesn't have to be necessarily scary, and maybe will be able to get like to that next step. So I just try to think of it as all very positive, because if everyone who had participated before me hadn't done what they did, I wouldn't have what I have. And I think that cycle's got to continue, but hopefully grow and continue to grow.
Very true. Thank you. I think that's a great place to stop. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here today, recognizing that there were some travel challenges combined with family commitments. Really do appreciate everyone's efforts. So to our panel.
And thank you to Hunter for everything he's done.
Yeah, thanks, Hunter.
Yep.
Thanks again. So now it's lunchtime, so we're going to ask you to exit, and I believe there are box lunches, and from there, you have a chance to open them up a little bit, have some to eat. Then we're going to have a lunch side, or at least I'll call it a podium side, fireside chat. So please, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks for giving us the opportunity to share our
We meet people too with the system, so.